So, thank you for joining us live. Lots of names rolling in. Also, Elise, cousin Pam, Virginia Fisher, Gwyneth West. Thank you very much for all the greetings. But we have a special guest tonight, Ambassador Samantha Power, because a new translation of Eric Maria Remarks, All Quiet on the Western Front, has been published. More than 20 million copies uh, have been sold since 1929. I hope calling it a classic doesn't deter anyone from reading or rereading it. And there's a wonderful foreword to this new Penguin edition. Um, the novel's translated by Maria Tatar, and Samantha Power has written the foreword. Of course, she's former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, U.S. Aid Administrator, Executive Director of Harvard's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, as well as a reformed journalist who covered wars in the former Yugoslavia. So, Ambassador Power, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Scott. Sorry to join late, everybody. We had some tech challenges.
Yep, that's all right. And notice how the two of us were absolutely useless in that. Yeah.
Maggie!
Right, exactly. We're both shouting for Maggie.
Happens all the time.
I know. So you have a lot of experience with war. What struck you about rereading All Quiet on the Western Front and this account of Paul Baumer, young German soldier in the trenches of what we now called World War I? It was simply the war then.
Yeah, well, exactly. I first of all should say that I reread All Quiet on the Western Front as the greatest development and humanitarian agency the world has ever known was being dismantled by Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And so it was a different kind of carnage that was being inflicted as I was going back in time and reconnecting with high school Samantha, who had read this book, and Bosnia former Stringer war correspondent Samantha, who had read this book, and again, reading it in a context in which we were taking away the tools to mitigate some of the harms caused by conflict, reading it at a time when there's more conflict happening, including the recently launched war with Iran, or conflict happening at any time since the end of the Cold War, and approaching record highs in recorded history if you count international conflict and internal conflict. So what struck me rereading it was, it's cliche, but just the timelessness of it all. And, the experience of one German soldier on the trenches in World War I is very different than the experience of a soldier or a civilian experiencing conflict in 2026. But the sort of gap between the deciders who propagate conflict for whatever reason, and then those who experience the consequences of conflict. I think the anger that builds up throughout the book toward like this sort of detached class, people who kind of rallied everybody to enlist, and then, all of the flags and nationalism that gets stirred up, all of the demonization of the other that is the necessary accomplice to generating enthusiasm for war at any point. Just that never goes away. And that, as it happens in international conflict, Paul is sort of musing with his comrades in the trenches about, well, these people on the other side, they're just like us. But you kind of can't let that thought in, that they would have more in common with the fellow grunts who are being thrust into battle than they would necessarily with people of their own nation. And I think that anger that builds up, is something when decisions get made that are so far removed from the human consequences of those decisions, you start to see that backlash. And that happened in Germany in the interwar period, we know, but there's a lot of disillusionment of course, with government and with elites these days, that is also can be exploited as well by nasty forces. But that detachment is really what struck me the most. There's the hell of war and the power of that depiction, but it's the who makes the choices and how far they live removed from those who have to do the fighting, or in the case of modern war, where civilians are so often the target, those who are most affected.
With your permission, I'm going to read just a short paragraph so people know what we're talking about. Remarque writes, as Paul Balmer, 10 days go by and every single hour is beyond comprehension, but also unremarkable. Attacks alternate with counterattacks, and slowly but surely, the bodies of the dead pile up on the field of craters between the trenches. The wounded men are not too far away from us. We can usually bring them in, but many of them have to wait out there for ages, and we can hear them dying. For 2 whole days, we searched in vain for one of them. He must have been lying face down, unable to turn over. Otherwise, there's no reason why we wouldn't have found him. When a man is screaming into the ground, it's almost impossible to locate him. And that is an experience people on both sides of the trenches have, isn't it? And then when the soldiers have some time off and go into a village, the people there don't know.
Yeah, I thought when he goes back, Paul goes on leave and goes, and I liken it in the forward to, vets who are coming back from Afghanistan, or certainly the iconic Vietnam vet trying to reintegrate into American society, and the kind of cluelessness of the rest of us about what those men and now women have experienced. But Paul goes back and just is totally condescended to by his elders, and all about how well the war is going, and he's seeing the war one way, and then he comes back and they're reading all the propaganda, and this local schoolmaster says to him, "You aren't really able to assess that. All you can see is your own little part of it." But the little parts are what add up to the reality. And like I was saying, it's really a book about those disjunctures, between the deciders and as it were, the implementers, the soldiers in this case, but also between propaganda and what's true propaganda about how well it's going, but also propaganda to demonize your enemy so that you can get all lathered up and do these unthinkable things that these schoolboys would never have done, but for this caricature of who's on the other side. So I did read it through the contemporary lens in a even more depressing way, which is those tools that we all read about in middle school and high school, about that were always employed to define the other and to make war possible, to get men to dive into battle and to get people to rally around the flag. And now our divisions and those same tools, that same propaganda, that same kind of shrunken identity, where back in the day it was, your Germanness took center stage over the fact that you were also a high schooler and somebody else who was a high schooler on the other side, that would have melted away. And, not likening our domestic problems or our polarization to World War I or anything like that, but just that shrinking circle of identity, the way the we gets defined and how little contact you have with the other, and then those same tools and that demonization in our echo chambers or information bubbles, scary. And it wouldn't have, I think, really occurred to Remarque in those days that just seems like such quintessential tools of warfare. And now that they're part of peacetime, if it's not political peacetime, it's at least not wartime within a country. But I thought that was a little chilling. That's not something that when I read it when I was in the former Yugoslavia, I read it in the context of, oh, this is what, Serb television has done to Bosnians to make it possible for them to fire on Sarajevo, and
Mhm.
I understood in that context of in a civil war even using those tools, but little chilling to think about how effective the demonization of the other becomes even in a political context these days.
I will tell the people who joined us tonight that you were kind enough to respond to a Q&A that'll be out in my NPR newsletter on Thursday. And I want to draw you out about something you were just talking about. This is about war and the common experience of war that is often not shared by people who are responsible for making decisions. But you are really concerned um, about the way in which we might be defining each other and not speaking across divides, political, social, cultural. I wonder if I could draw you out on that, having sharpened your message by reading this.
Yeah. Well, I've lived it. I mean, I started our exchange tonight just talking about the destruction, the dismantlement of US aid. And, um, it was a tiny fringe, loony meme, but fringe and small and lies. And then, you know, the viral phenomenon that can happen, and one tech bro with a couple 100 million followers, boom, suddenly the lie becomes a virus, and creates a chilling effect, chilling ecosystem where the very, in this case, Republicans, but who had not only supported U.S. aid and but earmarked it. I mean, basically dictated what the programs would be over especially the last couple of decades, like super hands-on level of micromanagement. It's a different kind of conversation to have, about things that aren't optimal in terms of outcomes, but the very people who'd seen the programs up close, and suddenly with this viral lie out there, and defining public servants, who, if we did that to our soldiers, if we denigrated our soldiers like that, nobody would stand for it. But these are public servants who'd served in all the same war zones, and, in with so many of the same risks, and yet slandered, defamed, denigrated. And, that this isn't an original thing. It just happens to be something that then, brought about the dismantling of an agency that was, and a group of individuals who were doing so much good around the world. So, like I said, that you don't read a book reads you. Auden said something to that effect. So I'm reading the book and just struck that the tools of demonization can be turned so quickly inward on what 5 minutes ago might have been defined as our own. But then so quickly those dividing lines, that demarcation occurs. So now, is there a remedy for that? And if you look, when we're reading our history, you see all of that animus deployed in order, again, to aid, to sustain the mentality needed for war, and needed to justify the resource mobilization for a war, and needed to justify killing other people, needed to justify mobilizing one's own. And then within years, you have the Marshall Plan, you have the nascent beginnings of the European Economic Community, and then the political integration that follows. That's in the international. Cooler heads were able to prevail. What's a little more worrying here, both internationally and domestically, is the absence of a kind of terra firma, a shared factual predicate where we're receiving our information, through fact checkers or through some shared sources. And so it's more worrying because those echo chambers persist, and it's hard to see. Again, you have the like lathering for full-on World War II. I mean, a degree of propaganda, and then it recedes, and governmental spokespersons take a different tact, and that gets covered, and temperatures cool, and exchanges happen, and you get to meet people who had once been demonized, and you kind of correct your understanding. That cross-pollination, that integration, I think that's, of course, what famously we're missing, today. And so whether it's in conflict like the Americans and Iranians and getting to know each other, or Gazans and Israelis, and all of the but literally the walls that have gone up, but even within our own society, I feel like there's an analogy there. Again, I don't want to stretch it, but it's an analogy.
I'm just going to ask you one last question, and as you get back to the evening. And I ask you this as a parent, as Caroline and I are. I remember sitting in a high school classroom before our oldest daughter first went into high school, and they went over the reading list, in which I believe this was included. And I remember thinking, wow, this is great. I mean, look at this, read all of these classics. And of course, it took me a couple of years to conclude nothing deters a child more effectively than reading something is when their parent calls it a classic. And then when society tells them it's a classic, is there any way around this?
Yeah, it's funny because actually you're right. Teachers call it a classic, parents call it a classic. My husband Cass has this great phrase, which is intuitive to every parent, which is reactance. So it doesn't even matter what the prescription is, it just generates reactance. It's a great concept. We have it with our kids. But so there's that. But at the same time, given what we were talking about before about our polarization and the absence of that shared platform from which to have disagreement about what to do, but at least you have like a factual or cultural predicate. And you and I, we have sports that still brings people from different walks and backgrounds and political persuasions together to root for the same team, as it were. But I, with our polarization, I'm even more dedicated to the idea of that shared reading, that shared cultural experience. Now, would that we lived in a world where some TikTok influencer who's got perfect skin and perfect genes, uses their TikTok to say, okay, brothers and sisters, all quiet on the Western Front, go. I don't know that that's where the influences are heading for this book of all books, um, but my son, he's high school junior now. He was assigned it in 8th grade. It made such an impression on him. And if grade grubbing or the incentive of just doing your homework is the way that we have to go about getting young people, across the state, as Illinois does so beautifully, or across the community to be working off the same song sheet, I think we take it and we deal with the reactants, and we try to sweeten the pot and promise ice cream on the other side or something. There's got to be some incentives left to us, Scott.
Maybe we should have. We didn't have to promise ice cream. They always knew it was on call. But we want to thank Samantha Power for being with us tonight, and I want to thank you all for joining us. Thanks so much for being on our open book, All Quiet on the Western Front, brought out once again. Wonderful translation by Maria Tatar, and a great foreword by Samantha Power, who will also be in my newsletter that comes out on Thursday. And tomorrow night we have Jen Phillips, who has written a wonderful novel, Ruby Falls. I don't want to. I don't want to give anything away, Ambassador. Ruby Falls is set in a cave during the Depression, and it's a publicity stunt. And there's several people that go in there including a Chicago reporter. Who do you think has the most unfortunate story? Yeah, exactly. Oh, the Chicago reporter is always the fall guy, aren't they? Come to think of it, it's like like a joke with a priest and a rabbi. So thanks very much, Frederick.
Scott, I'm glad to join, but I want to join your viewers and your devoted fans in wishing you a happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope you're not going to be home watching Venezuela and Italy, but going to be out celebrating with your family, being celebrated by your family. But if you are, there is great baseball on tonight.
Well, we will be out, but I will be checking the Venezuela versus Italy score. I've become quite a big fan of Team Italia. As a matter of fact, I think they're
Very
great.
impressive. They're
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
But happy birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Great to see you again.
Thanks
Thank you,
for being
Maggie,
with
for the
me.
tech help. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.